Hello, fellow travelers, and welcome to the Adverse Stars podcast. Oh, my loyal listeners, thank you for your continued support. And remember, click that subscribe button, everybody. This is an amazing episode because aboard the mothership is Deniz Camp. He's the writer of 20th Century Men from Image comic books. Come on board as we go traversing the stars. Hello, Mr. Camp. Thank you so much for coming to the Traversing the Stars podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Totally my pleasure, sir. So I always start off with a question of inspiration. So what inspired your love for comics and who are your earliest influences?
That's a great question. What inspired my love of comics? I've always loved comics ever since I was a kid. There's something about like a lot of people, my first experience with them was like superhero cartoons. So I was very into the Batman and the Superman cartoons when I was a kid. Even before I was reading comics, I really enjoyed superheroes, and so that was a big part of my that's what got me into comics. And then the more I read, the more I read outside of superhero stuff, and just the more I grew to love the medium itself, the way to tell a story, the kinds of stories you can tell. And so it just became kind of a hobby, and then an obsession, and then ultimately I started actually becoming a creator, which was not something I thought I would do when I was younger, but I kind of decided later in life to give it a shot. And yeah, it's been amazing. In terms of my influences in comics, probably my biggest influences are the ones you always hear: Alan Moore, Grant Morrison, Neil Gaiman, somewhat. Grant Morrison in particular was a very big one for me. He didn't write a lot of comics, but China Miéville is up there. And outside of comics, I love writers like George Saunders and Dennis Johnson, and so they have a huge influence on my voice. I find them very inspiring.
So what was about Grant Morrison that you thought to yourself, this is someone who is inspiring you to do what you do?
Yeah, I think both Grant Morrison and Alan Moore, there's so much, they do so much new stuff all the time. And you looking at Alan Moore page, there's more invention and cleverness and creativity on a single page of Alan Moore stuff than there is in some full series. He's a genius, and he's able to do so much with the space. I feel like I'm super inspired by both of them, to using formal techniques to tell very human stories in the most effective way possible, and to tell stories in the most effective way possible, in a way that makes you feel something and makes you think, and it really lights you up. I find something like Flex Mentallo for Grant Morrison and really all of Alan Moore's work to be just incredibly inspiring and beautiful.
I read that before you became a writer, you actually were attending med school. Is that true?
Yeah, that's definitely true. I was in, I actually I've been doing research, like science research, ever since high school, and then I majored in a science and cell molecular biology in undergrad, and then I went to med school afterwards.
So kind of draw that line between attending med school, being a writer, and comic books.
Yeah, there is no real line. There's no like direct line. I decided ultimately that I just didn't want to practice medicine. I loved learning about medicine, but the practice of it, especially here, was not what I wanted to do. And so it became a matter of like, well, what am I going to do with my life? And I had no idea. And I moved to New York with no money and like no I wasn't talking to my parents at the time. And it was, I just had no plan, and I kind of just bummed around for a while and lived off the kindness of friends. And in that time I just started writing for myself, and as I was writing for myself, I started turning them into scripts, and then I started trying to turn those scripts into comics. And then I applied for a Miller World Talent Hunt, the Miller World Talent Hunt, which was, I don't think it runs anymore, but for 2 years they were just letting people submit scripts and also artwork for a chance to write one of Mark Miller's properties. And I won for my Starlight script. And so that was the first thing I got published, and then it kind of just has been snowballing from there. I say snowballing, it has taken it has taken a while. You know, I think that was in 2015, 16 that I won that um award, and you know, it's 2022 now, and I'm just a new writer still. So
You know, I must admit, every so often I see these contests that, you know, looking for script contests, things of that nature. Because I'm a small indie writer as
oh
well, and I always find it in my head difficult to write a script that I don't know will ever see the light of day. So how do you
yeah,
motivate yourself to push through with something under a circumstance of, if it's not taken by Millerworld, it may not have been viewed
yeah,
ever.
yeah, that's the thing. I think for me, the thing that made me decide that writing was the thing to do was I'm not really concerned with or in love with the outcome. I'm much
Mm,
more in love with the process. And so I think, you know, with medicine, I really liked helping people, but the process sometimes could be really not something that I was enjoying. The minute to minute, the second to second
mm,
that you're doing, and so with writing, I don't really care if it's picked up. I mean, obviously, on balance, I would like my things to be published and for people to read them and for people to respond. That would be that's, you know, incredible that people would respond to the work. That's a really beautiful thing. But even without all of that, I love doing it. I love figuring things out. I love putting it on paper. I love reading it back to myself. I love hearing the voices in my head. I love imagining this, you know, the things happening. I see these characters in my head. I love them. I love them like I love people I know, and I
mm.
walk around with them all day. And that's a really beautiful thing. And I feel energized to do that. I'm excited to do that every day. And if nobody picks it up, then nobody picks it up, you know. And I think it's very important if you're doing something in your life, whatever. I mean, the best thing you can do for yourself is to find something that you love doing, not that you love having done, but that you
Mm.
love doing, and try to do that. And I think if you everybody has the potential to contribute something really great to anything, as long as they love doing it. And it's always in everything that I've ever been in. It's the people who love the moment to moment, second to second nitty gritty of doing something that are the best at it and are the ones that
Mm.
contribute something significant. And so, you know, whatever it is in life that you love doing, please just find a way to do that, and I think the rest kind of works itself out.
Well, I totally feel you on that one. I mean, obviously, the podcast isn't exactly, you know, making millions, but it's fun to do. It's great to talk to great people.
Yeah,
I think on that level, I totally understand what you're saying.
yeah, exactly.
So you're now the writer of 20th Century Men, which is a great comic book from Image.
Thank
So
you.
what inspired the creation of the series?
Yeah, that was it's one of those things that's really developed as it's gone. So I originally had just I wanted to do something with the I had this character and a voice for the main character, Peter, in my head, and I kind of wanted to do something that played with his like a Iron Man, a Soviet Iron Man who is in a Soviet version of Iron Man. So it's just as Tony Stark is, you know, a billionaire, and you know, he's all the things that you love about America. So he's a billionaire and he's an alcoholic, but he's a glamorous alcoholic, you know. And so my version of that, the Soviet version of that, it struck me would be he works for the government, and he's an alcoholic, but he's not a glamorous alcoholic. He is an ugly alcoholic, and you can see the scars on his face, and he's got a, you know, a nuclear heart, but it's not pretty, and it doesn't just sit like that. Like, he looks like a monster.
Mm.
And so that was kind of the starting point. And then I thought about where I would want to put him modern day, and I or not, and I decided I wanted to talk about a lot of the stuff that is happening today and is still relevant today, but
Mhm.
without the baggage of the stuff that's happening moment to moment, and with the benefit of hindsight in history, you know. So I set it in the we decided to set it in the uh, late 80s, during the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, which is a real event. And so that grounded it in a real event and in a real place and time. And so even though it's an alternate history, a history where, you know, these super beings have influenced the shape of history in various ways, it still gave me a ton of really gritty human grounding for the work. And so with that setting in mind, and then with when I started talking about it with Stepan, the artist, and seeing what he was really good at, which was these human moments, it kind of developed into this, I think, very human story filled with, a very emotional story, I think, filled with really rich characters and much more focused on the beauty and the ugliness of humanity than anything else. And so that's really, I didn't plan it to be the way that it is, to read the way that it is, but it kind of just happened organically, and we're super pleased and proud with it.
I think Peter is a fascinating character, not just as a character, but also visually interesting. Kind of, he's definitely loyal to his country.
Yeah.
He's very much, dedicated to the goal. And visually, he has that massive suit that appears almost that when he moves from like visually, like almost like knuckle walking, almost like a gorilla would. Are you
Yeah.
intentionally trying to demonstrate that the human side, but there's also kind of this bestial primal side to him as well?
Absolutely. He is an ugly, hulking creature that doesn't seem to fit anywhere. And here's a man who literally he wears armor all the time. Like what kind of a guy wears armor all the time? Like he's obviously, hiding from something and is trying to protect himself. And so I find this thing to be, he's incredibly opposing and strong, but at the same time, it kind of describes or it implies a certain vulnerability to the character that I think, again, has really made him come alive. And so much of that is from Stepan and how he decided to represent the character. And I cannot say enough about how much of a collaboration it is and how important the choices that both of us make, how much of an effect they have on each other. It's really a communal creation.
Now, as you alluded to, the story is based in the United States, or a fictional version of the United States versus a fictional version of Russia, Soviet Russia.
Yes.
Obviously, as you mentioned as well, there's some current events going on between the two nations right now that are kind of
Yeah.
in the news a little bit here and there.
Yeah.
Was there, as when you're conceiving it, a risk in making a protagonist the Russian character, or having it as evenly even
Balance.
sided as far as morally, they're both equally bad. They both have positive negatives, within the story, given
Yeah.
the current circumstance.
Yeah. So we've been working on this for a couple of years. So this was if the situation has changed, certainly, and I don't know that I would have started it this way if I had known that this was going to happen. But I think the point that we're making, I don't want to paint either side as being particularly heroic. I think the strength of the book has always been that there's this incredible complication of the characters, that even our heroes are kind of grotesque and not heroic, but to them, to a Russian or to a Soviet person, he's a hero, right? Just as to us, Captain America is a hero or a soldier is a hero. But if you bring a little soldier, a toy American soldier, to any of the countries that that we've, through imperialism and colonialism, hurt over the years, then it wouldn't have the same impact. Captain America might be reviled abroad, right? Because if a country's been wronged by the United States. And so that's very much a part of it. And I also didn't plan for Afghanistan to be so in the news as it has been in the last year with the withdrawal. And this takes place in Afghanistan. So all of that stuff, it just goes to show how much this stuff keeps recirculating. Everything just keeps happening and coming back around. And there's really, this is set in the 1980s. I can't stress that enough. It's heavily grounded in the time and the place. I've done a lot of research into that time and that place and this particular invasion, and yet somehow it feels like I'm that we're talking about the stuff that's happening today. And of course, that some bit of that does creep into the writing. There's no doubt about it. Like there is, but it's also heavily grounded in the actual time and place it's set.
Because once again of the connection it has, obviously, like I said, it's from the 80s. It goes back further than that. The story, but primarily takes place in the 80s. And once again, looking at the symbolism or what's going on now, is there an allegorical nature to the book, on how these countries have dealt with not only the Cold War, or what was the Cold War, it's not so cold in your book, but
Yeah.
also how the countries are dealing with their own internal struggles as well within that.
Big time. And I think when the book is done, it'll be pretty clear. It's pretty clear. I don't want it to be a morality tale. I'm not trying to tell anyone how to feel. It's more about talking about just how complicated and difficult and and morally thorny everything is, and how horrible it is for everybody, how hideous it is for everybody involved. Even all the heroes are victims, and all the victims are heroes, and I think, I don't know, like it's definitely not trying to, the only agenda is they say every war book is an anti-war book, and that's really the only, I guess, the only thing that I'm trying to get across. But even within war, there's this beauty and this horror. There's these incredible moments of camaraderie and comedy and all these other things, and having those moments represented in the work is important, because it not only does it give, it makes it has the other stuff stand in relief. The horror is that much more horrible when you've had the highs. The lows are that much lower when you've had the highs, and so it all has to be in there. But I don't want it to be a morality. I don't want to tell people what to think, but I do want to try to represent all the different kinds of humanity and the beautiful and horrible moments that you find in war and in the world in general.
Now there's a quote that I'm going to butcher in issue 4, because I'm going to have to paraphrase it, where in regards to the President Good, where I'm going to butcher the line completely, but I'm going to do my best so you know which one I'm talking
Sure.
about. It says something along the lines of, President Good is a devil, but sometimes the devil is what you need, something along those lines.
Yeah.
Now, I assume that goes the same for Peter as well. And is that true of all characters that are kind of existing within this kind of nightmarish Armageddon world that you've created?
Yeah. I think that's astute. I think it's not just in that nightmare Armageddon world, but in a lot of that's kind of what realpolitik is. I think it's the kind of thing you could imagine Kissinger saying about the kind of work that he was doing. So I think it's kind of there's this world of guns and bombs and spies and turning human beings into numbers or into statistics. I think that's devil's work, and I think we a lot of it is done in our world, not just in this horrible world that I've created or I've co-created, but happens in our world too. And I think there's this kind of ends justify the means thing is dangerous.
Now when I'm thinking about President Good, the two figures in history that pops in my brain is Nixon and Reagan.
Yeah.
Is this the closest amalgamation that can, for how he is presented in the story?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, Nixon, Reagan mixed with kind of just what you would realistically expect a Captain America guy plucked from the streets in the 1930s. What would that guy kind of be like? I suspect he would be, I mean, just knowing what 1930s people are, I expect he would be a little racist. Like, there's a lot of, I have a feeling he would be pretty rough. Like a lot of rough stuff has happened to him. So all these things, I have a pretty rich backstory for Good that you'll never see on the page, but that kind of informs who he is. And so it's a mix of everything, but it's certainly Reagan and it's certainly Nixon for sure.
Now, one thing that was very cool, especially in issue 4, that it's written in a very distinct way. It's almost like reading multiple different history books that have been researched, and obviously the history books are fictional because the events are fictional, but it's done and taken like cited sources of these history books explaining the scenes that you're looking at. So what led to that decision for that style, and how does that lend authenticity to the moments?
Yeah, that's a great question. That was really all about me trying to find a way to make this battle feel important. And so what I was trying to do, I was trying to invoke some of what Tolstoy did when he tried to make War and Peace important. Tolstoy had this voice, this omniscient omnipresent voice that just was with that he spoke he could write with such authority that he could go into this character's head and that character's head and do this, and this and describe this and that, and he wrote with such great authority and confidence that 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 it felt like God was telling you the story, and so I wanted something like that for this story. I wanted this event to feel grandiose and historic and important. And so I don't have, I'm not Tolstoy, obviously. And so I tried to think of a way that you could create some of that sense of, historicity about the events. And so I had this idea of like, well, what if we had things looking back, had a bunch of sources looking back and kind of interpolated them, and then you could get some interesting effects by the juxtaposition of the different sources, and then even the juxtaposition of all those different sources with the images could create a new level of meaning. And so it's always about creating as many levels of meaning as possible, I think, and that made it feel complex and big, and I think like a piece of history, I guess. So
yeah, and I think another thing that you did a great job is like both characters, Good and Peter, feel like people of their moment, that are needed in that moment or exist for that moment. Could a character like Peter exist in a world at peace or good?
yeah, I mean, I think he wouldn't have. That's a good question. I don't think if he had been raised in a world of peace, then he could have been something else. And I think that's the tragedy of a character like that, is that he wasn't born. He was a genius. He was born with genius. That's it. A certain aptitude, and he was taken as a boy, and he was turned into a weapons maker. That was how his genius was channeled. That was what was important to the society. And so there's something very tragic about Peter, I think. And so no, I don't know if he could survive in a world with peace as he is now, but he wouldn't exist in a world with peace. And so he would be a different person. I think probably they all would.
Well, given let's say, because once again you have the war. If the war were to resolve itself,
yeah,
and Peter is that man, and that's like, what would he? Could he still be what he is and do what he does in a world that no longer, what I'm saying, that is not absolutely necessary anymore?
Yeah, that's maybe a question for the sequel. I can't give away all my thoughts and feelings just yet.
Okay, that's totally fair enough. Now, another line in the text, I want you kind of to go into a little more explanation of. So, another line in the issue that especially the fourth issue, that I kind of want you go a little more explanation on. There's a line that's repeated that says, "Man is fluid."
Yeah.
So, what does that mean within the context of the story? Are the motivations, you mean, fluid, or is what defines us as people fluid?
Yeah, all of those things and more, right? So it's used to say that, it's a line from Marx and Engels, and about how people can change depending on their environments, essentially, and how ideology shapes mankind, or shapes the individual. And so in this story, it means a lot. It means quite literally that men are fluid. It means quite literally that you can learn, like just because you can't shoot doesn't mean you can't pick up a gun and learn. And then yeah, I think as Marx and Engels meant it, I think it means that human beings are infinitely plastic. Or near.
Listen, there's so many good lines. Once again, another line I'm gonna toss at you if you don't mind.
Sure. I'm flattered.
Okay, no problem. So so Peter is like the Iron Man. Russia, the Americans are using what's called suicide cowboys.
Yes.
Which are basically like they're not zombies, but I mean they're basically the dead being used to be reanimated and to fight. The book states they seem so impossibly alive. In fact, they were dead men. That's what gave them such power over us. That's, once again, I'm assuming that's from the Russian perspective, though, or is there also an American aspect of that where the idea that their own soldiers are being used like this is impactful?
Yeah, I mean, I'm an American. I grew up in the States. I'm an American, and so for me, it's kind of a sick take on on what is actually happening in the military, which is that you pick people in the, you know, the people in the most vulnerable people are ultimately where we get our military from. And so in this case, I very much heightened it. So it was, the idea was people with addictions and with debt and all the other things were given a chance to forgive all of that addiction and debt, or to forgive all the debt and, you know, get whatever drugs they want, because they were in this program that would have a very short lifespan, where they're basically suicide bombers, but for the United States government. And so I just felt like that was, you know, that's the United States that it's an unfortunate reality of the way of an all volunteer military operates in the United States, at least.
So the use of these soldiers, is that American desperation, or are they utilizing the fear because they just know how effective that is?
Yeah, I think it's much more they know how effective it is. It's you know, they're trying things. They like to try things. The United States likes to try things, and I think that's just, you know, one very efficient way of utilizing a resource. Just as you know, there's a character, Bill, who's also another United States weapon, and in fact, Good himself was a United States weapon. So, you know, it's all these different weaponization, you know, weapons of the United States versus all these different weapons in, you know, the Soviet Union or wherever else.
So within this fictional world, what do the citizens think of these suicide cowboys and what they're doing with them?
Yeah, I mean, I think they didn't know they existed until this battle, and it was publicized, and so you can get little glimpses of it in the text. But I think my experience has been there would be short-term shock and horror, and then because it happened abroad, people would quickly forget about it, and so that's my sense.
No, I disagree. The remote control does get changed every, you know, after a while. It's like I find, for better or worse, Americans are very good at adjusting to things. It's like, oh, I guess that's how it is now. Moving on.
Yeah, totally.
So, how many
man is fluid, you know?
That's exactly right. So, how many issues is 20th Century Man slated for?
6 issues. It'll be 6 issues, and I've already written the last, and we're hard at work on the last right now, and it's going to be the best one yet. So,
or are we looking at sequels?
Not immediately, but we've definitely talked about it, and Stepan the artist wants to do sequels and spinoffs, more like spinoffs than sequels. Like well, I won't say what, but we've talked about a number of projects, and he loves the characters and I love the characters, and so you know, we'll have to see. I think we're going to try to do something different, or we're going to work together for a long time coming, but I think we're going to do something different, and then maybe come back and revisit some of the characters.
So what's in store for the future issues?
The next issue that come out is issue 5, and that is a story of 2 paradises, and it's going to be it's like a big operatic story, you know, the incredible, just all 2-page, not all, but many 2-page spreads, and just maybe the most beautiful issue yet. And then 6, I don't want to give away, but I can't imagine ever writing anything better than issue 6, and the art that we have so far is just amazing, and I'm so proud of the whole back half, really the whole series. I'm really proud of, but I think the last 3 issues are stronger than the first 3 issues by a lot. So,
well, Mr. Camp, I look forward to reading these last issues, and next time you want to promote something, come right back on.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, man. I appreciate it.
Totally my pleasure. Have a fantastic night.
You too. Bye-bye.